Hi, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Lauren.
Welcome back to Capital Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
This week we'll be talking about the House's chaos with healthcare and the NDAA and Jasmine Crockett's Senate launch. After that, we'll have an interview with Congressman Stutzman.
Welcome back, everybody. We are starting a brand new week. It is the last week of the House before, well, actually for Congress until the holidays, which is kind of crazy.
Thank God, honestly.
I'm so excited.
I'm ready for a break.
Me too. And I think it's really great that we are going to have some time off, and everybody's going to have time off, and members are going to be in their districts, and they're going to hopefully come back refreshed. I don't know if they will, but maybe they'll come back refreshed because they got a lot to do coming up in January. You know, we talked about funding last time, so we won't bore the viewers and the listeners with funding again because there's always more to talk about. But I think that this week is going to be really critical for a lot of reasons. Yeah. But I think to even think about what's going to happen this week, we have to look back at what happened last week because last week was a lot. There was a lot that happened.
So many things, so many more things than I expected. I mean, we started last week off busy. Monday was filing deadline for Texas, which kind of started the week off running. I feel like usual jobs have Monday as one of their busiest days, and that is really one of our slowest days typically, which is unusual.
But not last week. Last week was a lot.
Texas filed and we hit the ground running. The House chamber was just in chaos. I think that a lot of that finally boiled over after being home from so long during the government shutdown, that all these members have so many priorities that they want to get done. We have healthcare deadlines looming. We have so many things just going on and so many priorities that these members have that they want to get done because Congress has been having a historically unproductive year. I mean, a lot of things are getting done by executive action, which I think that there was a lot of frustration on the Democratic side about that, but now that frustration is reaching Republicans. I think that they're getting frustrated with the executive just taking all of their power. People like to do the jobs that they were given to do, and Congress hasn't really been given that opportunity. And so I think that frustration's looming. I'm hopeful that the holidays, having them be at home and wind down with their family, will bring them back and kind of bring more of a cohesive governing body. But I'm kind of thinking that they're going to come back and it's going to be the same thing as when they came back from the government shutdown, and they have all these things that they want to get done that leadership isn't necessarily appeasing them on because leadership has their own priorities, that now that they feel like they can buck leadership with such a small majority, they're just going to be discharge petition crazy.
Well, and I think that you made a good point that I think Democrats, since Trump got into office, have been crying foul about the fact that the executive branch is taking over so much power. But now, after the government shutdown and over the last couple months, I think now Republicans are starting to understand that they are allowing their leadership to cede a lot of power to the presidency. Yeah. And when you were in the middle of the year and you have reconciliation and you have spending deadlines, they are all good about coming together and saying, you know what, we'll push that to the side. We have other things to work on as a party. But now that we're at the end of the year, they're realizing that they're going to be now heading into 2026 without maybe the major priorities that they campaigned on. Yeah. And for some of them in blue seats or swing seats or whatever, they really desperately need those legislative wins. And I think that that's why healthcare was forever like Democrats' baby. But now I think Republicans are finally seeing the light a little bit and recognizing that these expiring subsidies, which we've talked about a little bit on the show, but these Affordable Care Act subsidies that a lot of Americans use, and they're about to expire.
Yeah, so they're meant to keep premiums down on health insurance, which helps people across the country. I'm sure that all of our viewers know how expensive healthcare is and health insurance is. And so, I mean, it's going to affect thousands of people in every single member's districts. And if we're continuing on this trend of how many wins or points made up that Democrats have had in elections last week, like in Miami, in Georgia, they flipped 2 seats. We saw the November elections trended blue. These members in vulnerable seats that are Republicans are concerned because if these healthcare premiums skyrocket due to the subsidies expiring whenever Republicans don't have a plan, it's going to screw them next year.
Yeah, and I think that that's why you're seeing so many Republicans now deciding that they are going to buck leadership, and it's members that you wouldn't expect. You always expect the more firebrand conservatives, the Freedom Caucus, to be the ones who are kind of being the thorn in the side of the speaker. But right now, I think the speaker is getting really kind of railed by his centrist members because his centrist members are being like, hey, wake up. Like, we literally are now in the last week of the House. You unveiled your health care plan.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that healthcare
the healthcare plan, and heavy quotes if you're just listening. But basically, what Republicans have been asking for is a healthcare alternative to Obamacare. They have not liked Obamacare for years. That's been a known thing. And so when Speaker Johnson unveiled his plan, it wasn't really a plan. It was, and not to be funny, but like when Trump said on the debate stage that he has the concept of a plan, that's pretty much what this was, because it was basically
a bullet-pointed list.
A bullet-pointed list of 10 things that they could do.
And 10 things that are really wide ideas that have been introduced before.
They are old. They're not new ideas that came out of nowhere.
Yes, none of them are new ideas. All of them are old ideas. So it's not like they're unveiling some big plan. It's as if they took 10 previous ideas and slapped them on a board.
And the problem that they said, and the leader Scalise admitted this, is that we have consensus on some things, but those some things are likely bills that have already gone through committee. Like, there are healthcare bills sitting in committee right now. They aren't going to reform Obamacare. They're not going to tackle the Affordable Care Act subsidies as a whole, but they are going to try to lower the costs for Americans, which are great. Those bills are great, and they should come to the floor, as a lot of Republicans have said. But I think what people are looking for right now is, well, you've said that you hate Obamacare. So what is your plan to fix it? Like, what is your new Obamacare? Like Trump care? Like, what is your new plan is basically what people are looking for. And I think that a lot of centrist Republicans were upset when they came to this meeting with their leadership, and their leadership were like, well, here's 10 ideas we could do. And then everyone started talking about what they liked and what they didn't. There's no consensus. And so now they spent all of last week, and now they're heading into this week, potentially to vote on healthcare bills on the floor, and there's no real solution to these credits that expire basically December 31st. So that's why you're seeing centrist Republicans using these discharge petitions. We've already seen one from Representative Luna, who, she's not Freedom Caucus, but she is very like-minded in their ideology.
She was Freedom Caucus.
She was Freedom Caucus.
She actually left Freedom Caucus over her first discharge petition.
Because her own members were trying to stop her, which was very interesting.
Yes.
You've seen discharge petitions from Thomas Massey, which him bucking leadership was not a surprise.
Yeah, no.
But now that we have these discharge petitions from people like Representative Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania and Representative Kiggins in Virginia, and they are combined with Democrats. These are bipartisan discharge petitions, but the fact that these two members who very rarely give leadership any trouble.
Fitzpatrick a little bit more this year, but Kiggins is pretty.
Kiggins is pretty, because they stick with leadership. They stick with their goals, but they are also two members who, in my experience with them, have never not stood up for exactly what they want, even if it's unpopular.
Totally.
And so I think that that's why them leading the discharge petitions is not a shock.
I think people trust them too, and they are well aware that they like to get stuff done. I feel like we talk about this a lot. There's a lot of members who are there to get policy done, and then there's a lot of members that are there to just kind of
be on TV.
And those members are definitely there to get stuff done.
Yeah.
I mean, Fitzpatrick is in an extremely hard district. You saw a lot of Pennsylvania Republicans sign on and join him in that, which I think is really telling of where that petition is at, and like the state of healthcare in the state of Pennsylvania specifically. But to break down, kind of going back a little bit, as an explainer for healthcare, because healthcare is such an intense and complicated topic, like one that we can't even fully grasp.
No.
The way that I think of it in my head is that the way that Democrats are with healthcare and they can message it and they can win elections on it is the direct equivalent to how Republicans are with border policy.
I would
Republicans
agree.
can message border policy far better than Democrats ever could. It's a winning issue for them. And it's not only a winning issue in their party, but it's a winning issue for swing voters. And I think that healthcare is that for Democrats, which is why it's such a big deal going into 26, because obviously, as we saw in 24, border policy was a winning issue for them. And so Republicans kind of laying off this and falling back on old plans or trying to message healthcare isn't working because that isn't their strong suit. Just like,
and that's not really their fault. I mean, it is now, I guess you could argue, but Republicans never were the party that you would go to be like healthcare reform. I don't think that if you were somebody who you didn't know what party you want to vote for, you wouldn't really in the past look to Republicans for that. And Republicans have been, staunchly like anti-Obamacare. They have been very anti-PBM. And I think you can find some Democrats who are also in that arena as well. But Democrats, as you said, have largely been kind of the party champion of healthcare. And so I think now what Republicans are realizing is that they have been yelling so loud about Obamacare that they actually had no idea how to fix it. They just were mad about it. Kind of like how Democrats would, with the border thing, like Democrats would say that it was awful that there were all these illegal immigrants coming into the country, but they never really had a plan how to stop it because they didn't want to, tackle DACA, or they didn't want to tackle, visas and things like there was a lot, and immigration and healthcare are two obviously very different topics, and both have like intricate things in them.
And very emotional topics.
They're very emotional topics, so it's understandable that it's very hard to touch those without hurting someone's feelings or, making another like part of your base upset. But I think that Republicans are realizing that they have just been spending so long railing against a policy just because it's a Democrat policy, that when they're presented with an opportunity like they are now with the trifecta to fix it, they have no idea how, because and you could argue that it's because of their small margins in the House, but also I think it's because that you have two warring factions in the Republican Party. You have the really conservative folks who don't want any reform at all. They just want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And then and if you talk to them, they have some ideas about what they would not necessarily replace it with, but items that they want to tackle to alleviate problems for Americans. And that's all great. But that still leaves a whole chunk of Americans who rely wholeheartedly on those subsidies.
Yeah.
You can't just ignore, the 80% just to help out the 10%.
I think that a lot of those super conservative Republicans, or Republicans that were looking for an alternative to Obamacare, were looking for a plan from the White House. I was talking to Congressman Van Drew a few weeks ago, and he was talking about how he wants the White House to step in because he thinks that that's the only way that they're going to come to a consensus, especially.
Which is what we've seen this year. We saw that with reconciliation. They never would have been able to get it done without Trump stepping in because everyone was disagreeing. Even with appropriations sometimes, like he has to step in and tell his more conservative members, hey, back off.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different bills. And so Trump has the ability and has shown the ability that he can do so. So the fact that he isn't stepping in yet, I think, is very interesting.
I agree. And I mean, it is interesting, his interactions with Congress. He interacts with Congress different than any other president ever has. And so the amount that his pull on Capitol Hill is wild, and I think that'll change drastically after next November because he'll be a lame duck president. But as of right now, a lot of those members are still looking to the White House for guidance on everything.
And Trump had said last week that he's said in the past that he isn't really keen on extending the ACA subsidies, but he really wants to make sure he's giving money back to Americans.
Yeah.
And then when he's asked for details, there's not a lot of details that are being brought forward, and I think that's what's frustrating a lot of Americans who are outside of DC, who are just, I feel like people who are in the Midwest or in your home state of Texas, they're sitting here thinking, we don't really care what your conversations are, but my premium is about to skyrocket January 1st. So have some
we don't
sort
care
of
what
plan.
the solution is,
just
have
one.
a solution.
Have one. And so, and for them, they're like, well, you Republicans, you're the White House, you're in the House, you're in the Senate. You're the ones who can fix this or not. And I think that that's why Republicans are in such a really tough spot right now.
And I mean, they need Democrats to get any healthcare plan across the finish line unless they did it through a reconciliation package, which takes months. So it's going to have to be done bipartisan.
Yeah.
Which is so tough because Democrats aren't willing to work on anything bipartisan unless it's an extension of Obamacare subsidies.
Yeah, and I've had some Democrats tell me that they don't want to see anything less than a three-year extension because that's what House Leader Jeffries put forward. He has a discharge petition for that.
And
to
the
extend
Senate,
it for
that's
3
what
years.
the Senate wants
too. And the Senate wants too. And last week, the Senate rejected that plan from Senate Democrats. They also rejected a GOP plan. So the Senate is now kind of not doing anything. And I think a lot of House Democrats were looking to Senate Democrats to see what was going to happen there. Well, they both cancel each other out, so now they're just sitting there. So now eyes are shifting back to the House to be like, okay, so what's happening now?
Yeah.
And the House doesn't really know. And so we're looking at these discharge petitions, but this is the last week.
Which those discharge petitions for an ACA extension of these subsidies are the best chance at that.
Yes.
I mean, not even the best chance, the only chance. And so if Democrats are really going to stay that harsh on the 3-year to not extend it, I do think that if they expire, that does kind of fall on Democratic leadership for not backing that in this last stretch. I think it would be a mistake as well.
Especially when they are on this uphill incline after, like you said, the blue wins in November and the ones that happened last week. They literally don't have to do much.
They're having Republicans hand them a solution that may
They're
not
getting
be,
it on a silver
that
platter.
may not
All
be
they have to do is just say yes.
And it is way more than, honestly, other Republicans were willing to give. A lot of Republicans were really only willing to give a 1-year extension. Like you said, Democrats want 3. They're meeting in the middle at a 2-year extension, and if Democrats don't sign on and it expires, I do think that blame falls onto them.
Democrats have a hard time talking about that to their voters in 26.
There was a handful of Republicans handing them a solution with, that gives them a majority in the House. It gives them a lot of weight on stuff being scheduled on the floor, stuff being voted on the floor. And if they don't, seize that opportunity, then I don't really know how they would work with that or work around that.
I don't either. I think the Republican conference, like you said, they're literally... they're giving you all of the Legos, but Democrats are reading the instructions upside down and backwards. like you literally have the chance here to do it. I think that there's really there's really only one avenue that Democrats can come on top about this, and I think that's voting for or signing on to either of the discharge petitions. And Democrats have said they really like Representative Kagan's and Josh Gottheimer's discharge petition because it's a year of extension and then a year of pretty much guaranteed reforms, and it fast tracks them. There's a set of rules in there that if that bill passes, they will make sure that anything that touches those tax credits, it gets kind of a fast track to the floor, which a lot of times bills just get held up in the rules committee and under a rule and things like that. And
committees.
And all that, red tape of sorts pushes it back. You've got Fitzpatrick's and Jared Golden's discharge petition, which is a 2-year extension, then it has other portions in there for health saving accounts and a lot of nitty gritty healthcare stuff that I won't really talk about because I'm not an expert, but either one would be a good option. They may not be the best option, but I've had some Democrats tell me that the reason why they like Gottheimer's and Kagan's is because they think that as a whole, that's the best avenue for the best policy, whereas Fitzpatrick and Golden's, while their hearts are in the right place, it kind of, to some Democrats, feels like this is Republicans saving their necks. And just doing it for political cover and not to actually make change. I'm sure Fitzpatrick and other Republicans would have a lot to say about that. I think that they would argue
they've been working together for a few weeks, though.
Yes, so I think
that's what Lawler and Fitzpatrick told us as reporters right after they introduced the discharge petition, is that they've been working together for weeks on this issue.
Yeah.
Which I do think their discharge petition does signal that they've been working on this for weeks and they've been maybe trying to work with leadership, and leadership hasn't shown any give on that, which is what forced them to introduce a discharge petition.
Yeah.
Because, it is a buck to leadership whenever you introduce a discharge petition. It's taking the power away from leadership and scheduling your own vote if you're like, I have the votes for this, which does take power away. I don't think there's ever been a Congress with this many discharge petitions.
Not in recent memory.
No.
There's and I think even if there is, this is just the year of members just kind of going haywire. The rise in the censures. It could be of your own party. We saw that Democrats and Republicans have tried to censor each other. The discharge petitions and the way that Republicans have helped a lot of Democrats and vice versa. I think that this is just the year of frustration. And when Speaker Johnson was asked about the discharge petitions, he gave just a generic answer of I like my members, they're doing what they feel like they have to do. They're in complicated races. I get that. And the speaker is in a really tough spot.
I was about to say, but I don't think we can blame all of that on him.
No.
Because it is the smallest margin in history, and we are in the most polarizing political environment that we've ever been in.
Yeah.
And so maybe some of it has to do with the executive taking a lot of power and members being frustrated, or a little bit of Johnson's leadership, but I do think that you do have to take some of the blame off of him. Look at the margins, look at the polarization, look at everything like that, and take that into account for how we got here, and less of the fact that leadership is failing.
And I think that last week's vote on the NDAA, I think really kind of proves that point a little bit. Because, so last week there was the annual defense bill, and it's one of a very few bills that Congress has to pass every year. They have to pass it. There's nothing you can do about it. You have to do it.
Yeah.
And so when it was time for the procedural vote, because there was the procedural vote and then there was the let's pass the bill vote, during the procedural vote, there were 6 Republicans who were threatening to tank it.
They love to do that.
They love to tank that. And I've had some people ask me, they reached out to me and they were like, why don't Democrats just vote for the rule? They're going to vote for the NDAA, so why don't they vote for the rule?
Great question.
It's a great question because a rule vote, it's one of those little niche House things that I kind of wish I didn't know about, but now I know everything about it.
Just to show loyalty.
It's a party loyalty vote. You will very rarely, even if there was a large margin between the parties, a rule vote historically has always been a party line vote. You know, if the Republicans are in the majority, Republicans are voting yes for the rule, Dems are voting no. If it's flipped, it's flipped. And so Democrats crossing party lines to vote for the rule would be abnormal, especially because lately when a rule vote happens, Democrat members are advised to vote against it, because if they do vote against it, then they can bring up something that they are passionate about. And a lot of that has been about these healthcare credits. And so if they vote against the rule, they might have an opportunity to force a vote on that bill, or like a motion to recommit or things like that.
Yeah.
Very technical stuff. But that's why you wouldn't see a lot of Democrats vote for the first time around. So they were just kind of sitting back, letting the Republicans tank themselves. Eventually, 5 out of those 6 Republicans were able to get some sort of assurances from the Speaker or from Secretary of State or White House or things like that. And then it passed. And then NDAA passed with flying colors. But it was, for a minute there, it looked like Johnson was going to get his 7th rule vote failure of his speakership, which is
a
insane.
reflection of speakership. I mean,
it is a reflection of speakership.
Historically,
if you can't pass a rule vote, that shows that you are a weak speaker. And that's like not an opinion, that's just a fact. That's the way that it's been. And so he's had 6 already under his leadership. And a lot of people have argued that those are because of Freedom Caucus and people, you know,
small
weaponizing
margins.
this and small margins. But you can't escape the fact that like that is a failure. That is a weak leadership team that you have if you have 6
and I don't
of
think
them.
that's all on Johnson. Like,
No,
you
it's
have
a
a
team.
whip.
You have a team.
You have a whip who is supposed to have the votes before a bill hits the floor, or any vote hits the floor. And so it doesn't all fall on Johnson. It falls on leadership as a whole.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you look back on past speakerships, Pelosi never would have let 8 rule failures happen. I think despite...
I don't think she ever would have brought a bill to the floor if she thought one Dem was going to vote against a rule. Like, I think that, and if she did, she walked right up to them, and within 30 seconds they were like, yes.
It shows the grasp that they have on their caucus, and I think that grasp is slipping. I think that you have to give them credit, like I have said continuously, with the slim margins, but like rule vote failures, discharge petitions, censures within your own party is signs of slipping leadership.
Yeah. And again, we could dissect if that's because they're giving all that power to Trump, and so
there's so many ways.
And honestly, I think that that's one of those things that we're not going to actually know until years from now, when people can analyze it and see what happens next. And I can't wait for that. You know, we always talk about how we're like nerds and we can't wait for like
maybe we'll write a book.
Polling. Maybe we should write a book. Oh my God, if you guys leave a comment if you would read our book, I think that would be a great idea. But yeah, I think that there's just, you know, I think that last week was so chaotic for Johnson and for House Republicans just in general, that this upcoming week I think is a chance for them to, I don't want to say necessarily like right the ship, because we're not going to see any of the ACA bills that are under these discharge petitions go, because we haven't seen a ton of signatures yet on them. There's a considerable amount, but I don't think
it'll all lean on Democratic leadership.
It'll all lean on Democratic leadership. I think that this week you're going to see a lot of more messaging bills.
Totally.
And less of actual policy. And so that is going to make things incredibly difficult for Republicans when they come back in January, because also, as a final note, Johnson has said, spending too, can't forget that. But also as a final note, Johnson has said, and Leader Scalise has said this, that they will put bills on the floor, but that they're looking to do reforms in the new year. So they've kind of already told people that they're not really interested in solving this ACA issue now.
They've even said Q2. Like, they're not even leaving it as January, February. They're talking first half of the year.
But that's the problem, because then basically what they're doing is, like they love to do, and it's both parties, but I mean, for the last year, it's been Republicans. Republicans love to push things to the last minute. So they can say this now and then go home to their families. But then when they come back in January, a lot of people are going to be like, okay, so what's the plan? You said you were going to do stuff this year. Like, where is it? And if they don't have a plan, that's going to be
discharge petition.
Like, so you're really shooting yourself in the foot. And again,
it's hard not to.
Democrats had a point. They started bringing up ACA credits in the fall. They said, you guys like to wait to the last minute. Let's do something now. Let's do bipartisan work. Let's do reforms. Like, they said that. To their credit, to Democrats' credit, they did warn Republicans about this. And Republicans kept saying, no, it's a spending issue, not a policy issue. But then look where we are. It's the last week of votes for both chambers, and you've got nothing. And so you can't really go back to your voters and say, hey, you know, we're working hard for you. We're going to fix this for you, if you've been ignoring people and you're fighting with your own people, and now you have no plan. So I think that they're in kind of a tough spot.
I mean, they have a lot going forward to next year, which is wild for a midterm year. We have, I think, only 3 weeks in a row at a time of session, which is not long periods, but that's typical for a midterm year. So we have a lot coming up. Next, we have our interview with Congressman Stutzman.
Well, welcome to Capitol Conversations, Congressman Stutzman. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Great to be with you all today.
And I think the big topic, there's actually a lot of big topics, so we can't even just narrow it down to one these days. But the big one that's kind of going on in your state in particular is redistricting. We're seeing it around the country in different states. Some have been successful, some are being challenged. Can you give us an update of what's happening in your state specifically and what the likelihood is that you think your home state is going to be able to redistrict?
Yeah. So obviously, redistricting is for Indiana, this would be mid-census or mid-decade to redistrict. So this is breaking precedent. And that's kind of the objection that the state senators are giving for their reasons for not supporting redistricting. But I think it's going to happen. I think we're going to get it done. The explanations, as we've been having conversations over the past 4 months, have really given them an understanding of why this is important, why we need to do it. Of course, one of the biggest reasons is the census from 2020 counts citizens and non-citizens in the census. And so states like California and Illinois, the sanctuary states, they get an advantage because you have illegals being counted in the census. So if there were even 5 million illegals in California, that gives them almost 7 or 8 more districts than what they should have. Those may be spread around the country to other states. So I think that the whole conversation around the border and illegals coming into the country have really been the reason this whole conversation has started. Then also, once you start looking at the maps, that the way Illinois drew their maps to favor Democrats, the way California draws their maps to favor Democrats, Republicans I don't think we think like that. We really try to be objective and fair. And you could have a kindergarten class draw the maps in Indiana, and it would be all Republicans for the most part. So that's why this is an important conversation to have. I think we'll get it done. There was the Senate leader, Rod Bray, has been the one that has objected mostly. But he said he wasn't going to call the legislature back into session before Thanksgiving, but now he's changed his mind, and they're actually going to be meeting today. It's already passed the House, and so I think the pressure is on the Senate to move forward. And I know there's been some really good conversations over the weekend that have been taking place where senators are starting to understand better why this is important to move ahead. That way, Hoosiers have fair representation and equal voice in Washington to balance out the states that have manipulated their maps.
Yeah. Going off of that, I know we've talked to a lot of members, both Democrats and Republicans, that obviously since Texas started the redistricting process earlier this year, there's been a wildfire, rapid response from across the country. I think a lot of members are concerned that with redistricting kind of spreading like wildfire like this, that it's going to be an effort that's used every 2 years now instead of a census that typically happens every 10 years. Are you concerned that this is going to start a pattern going forward, that we're just going to redistrict all the time?
Yeah, I was actually talking to a colleague of mine about that yesterday, and there is concern. The problem is should we have a national standard? Well, the standard right now is the Constitution, and so the Constitution leaves it up to the states to select how we are going to send our representatives to the U.S. Congress. It used to also include the U.S. senators, where the legislature would pick the senators, but that's changed. It's going to have to probably be a constitutional question. The other idea that's been floated around is just having Congress pass a law that says you can't redistrict mid-census. But then you run into the problem with the courts, just like the courts were involved in the reason that Texas redistrict. So you have all these different ways of just drawing the maps. California has an independent commission, but then they put it to the voters this past month, and the voters said, we're going to bypass the commission and we're going to send it straight to the legislature. So every state has a different process in getting to how they draw their maps. I think there should be some sort of national standard. That way we're all operating under the same rules. but I think it's going to have to take a constitutional measure to be able to actually get that done, unless we all have some sort of compact that we're going to agree to. But as soon as somebody breaks the compact, then we all run to our corners again, and it becomes very partisan.
Yeah, that was a loaded question. So lots behind that. But
Yes.
interesting to watch.
And I'm curious too, when this is happening and we're seeing it in Texas and California and Indiana and other states, redistricting takes up a lot of time for the state legislators, obviously, but also for the members of Congress whose districts might be impacted by this.
Yeah.
How concerned are you that redistricting is going to impact you specifically? And are you worried at all that you're going to be in more red seat? Are you going to be in a less red seat? Just kind of what do you see for your political future based on the maps that you've seen or heard about?
Well, I mean, there's some criticism of the Indiana maps as they are currently drawn,
Hmm.
that it makes the Republican seats so safe that, I'm in a very safe Republican seat,
Hmm.
that, I'm only going to be interested in the primary voters in my seat. So let's say that my district becomes more Democrat, which it looks like it will become more Democrat. But, that then I'm going to be more interested in the general election. And at the end of the day, we are responsible to work for every one of our constituents, whether they're Republican, Democrat, or independent. That's how I look at it. Not every congressperson may look at it that way. I do know that the more Republican a district is, that the election is really in the primary, and that's the case in the third district. Even after the new maps have been released, my district will still be very Republican, but it's important for all of us to, I would like to see the maps drawn in every state, and they stay that way for the entire 10 years. That way, our constituents know who is their representative. That way, they aren't being tossed back and forth in different political fights, more or less. And but that's the process that we have. So we have to work within the process. It's important, I think, for Republicans and Democrats to find a way forward that it's going to be a similar standard across the country for all districts as they're being drawn for the legislature, or whether it's an independent commission. But to get all 50 states to agree on something that is partisan and political at times is pretty tough to accomplish.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we're busy across the country with all of this, but we're also really busy in Washington in these next 2 weeks leading up to Christmas. Can you talk a little bit about what NDAA passage is going to look like, what some form of a healthcare plan is looking like right now? Can you just give us any updates that you are seeing?
Yeah, I don't think that healthcare was necessarily on the agenda per se, other than reforms and saving, making the reforms to our to Medicaid programs, which is, sees a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. But what one thing that Republicans have known for a long time is that Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, was not going to be really affordable unless it was subsidized by the federal government. And that's what's happened. And now that those subsidies expire this year, we're seeing premiums going way up. Well, in the long run, do we want to just keep subsidizing the insurance premiums to keep them low? But we're taking from taxpayers, across the country to pay down insurance premiums. Well, I believe that we should empower the American consumer and just send those subsidies directly to them in an HSA. And then let's start making the reforms to the system, whether it's insurance or whether it's the providers themselves, that we actually understand what is the cost of healthcare. It's the largest expense that we have in this country. It's the fastest growing expense in this country. And I think if we just try to put a band-aid on it and say we're going to continue to subsidize it for the long term, it will cause the country to go bankrupt. And so we need to, I believe the pathway is to take those subsidy dollars, redirect them directly to consumers. I know that August Pfluger and the Republican Study Committee have released a plan. I know that healthcare is a very volatile issue, especially when it comes to elections. Like we saw when the Affordable Care Act actually passed, Democrats, they lost a ton of seats because the American people, a majority of the American people, weren't excited about what Obamacare was going to do. Well, now that we've lived with it for 15 years, we're actually starting to see that the Affordable Care Act is truly unaffordable.
And so, what do you think is the likelihood that we see some sort of bill, whether it's, a bipartisan ACA extension, which you have some of your colleagues and Democrat colleagues trying to put on the floor, Speaker Johnson is also toying with a plan as well. What do you think is the likelihood that the House votes on something like that by the end of December, or do you think that this is going to be something that Republicans will tackle in the new year?
More than likely, anything big will be tackled in the new year unless
Mhm.
there's some broad consensus that's going to, make healthcare more affordable for our constituents, and is it going to reduce the debt and deficit for the federal government? It can't just continue to be uh, you know, government paying down the costs of healthcare to insurance companies. Look at health insurance companies since Obamacare has passed, their profits have increased over 400%. So the insurance companies are super profitable. I've said, for a long time, now we have too many hands in the cookie jar for health and for healthcare reimbursements. You have the government, so you have big government involved setting prices along with health insurance companies that are taking money off the top. There's so much overhead. There's actually programs out there like MediShare, which is a sharing program that's based out of Florida that is Obamacare approved. Obamacare approved the program. That's sort of a program back in 2010 when they passed it. And if you look at a MediShare model, the premium is more than half of what traditional insurance costs through the Obamacare health network. So I think there are better models out there. We have to just be willing to look at that. And I think it's also been important for the American people to understand that once you take the subsidies away from the federal government, that the true cost of health insurance is unaffordable and that something has to be done. So I think that's also been an important piece to all this, that if you keep subsidizing a problem and the American people don't realize it's a problem, when you make any changes, they're not going to understand why. I think we have to understand that, hey, this truly does cost us more if we continue down the route of Obamacare.
Do you think that Republicans need to work harder and better about messaging healthcare? Because I think that that's something that Lauren and I have heard from members, not only Republican members, but also Democrat members, that in general, Congress needs to be better about speaking about healthcare to the American people and not in a way that's condescending, like actually giving them
Yeah,
like the bare bones facts and really speaking to them on an individual level. Do you think that Republicans in particular have their healthcare messaging down, and what would you like to see them change if you think that there's maybe more work to do there?
I do think that Republicans are a little mixed in our messaging because some are willing to just continue the subsidies for another year or 2 years. Others want to see bigger reforms taking place. I think at the end of the day, where I'm coming from, I think that if we empower the American consumer, that is ultimately it's a compliment because we can all make our decisions better than what the federal government or the health insurance companies can. The frustration that I hear from constituents is that I have to go to the hospital and I don't know what the prices are going to be. It's almost like people have given up. We don't know what the price of healthcare really costs anymore. And so it's a little insulting, but there's no other path around it unless you're paying cash out of pocket. That's why I think plans like MediShare have become so popular because they know at least the premium is affordable. The healthcare cost to a family, the monthly premium shouldn't be as much as a mortgage payment or more than a car payment, but that's what it's become. And so I've seen already a lot of people saying, and this is just on social media where I think people are just generally honest, like, I'm not going to have insurance anymore. I can't afford it. So I'm going to go without it and just pay any fees or penalties that I have to according to what the rules are. So I think, Republicans, we need to focus on empowering the American consumer on healthcare. And so many people do like to know that they can make their own choices, who their doctor is, where they can go get prescriptions, and they can, of course, just take their family to an emergency center if there's an emergency, and that they know they're not going to have to go bankrupt because of that.
I have a final question too. So you are one of the unique members where you were in Congress for a little and then you left and then you came back. And
Yeah.
that I feel like gives you such a unique perspective because I was not covering Congress when you were in your first, stint, but I now am. And Lauren and I talk about this all the time with a lot of people who have come on our show about how things have changed, whether people have left or they have, moved jobs, from House to Senate or staffer to House or whatever. What would you say is the biggest change that you've noticed from your previous House stint to now, and whether that's good or bad.
There's a lot more bomb throwers, and I think that's because of social media. It seems like the noise is so loud that people are looking for ways of getting attention, and so a lot of crazy things are said sometimes on both sides, on the far left and on the far right. So I try to be that a steady voice and a fair voice, one that's objective, and looking at a problem and finding a solution. I was as you mentioned, back in the private sector for 8 years. I was in business, and you have to find a path forward. When you're in business and you have problems, you have to find a solution that works for everybody. And if it doesn't work, then you're going to have to find a path out of it. So I enjoy fixing problems, and that's one of the reasons why I ran for Congress again, because I believe that that's where most of the problems lies, in the federal government. And of course, President Trump is a huge difference maker. On my second time around, I was there during the Obama years, and here you have a businessman who understands how to fix problems, and he actually acts. He moves ahead. But the other big difference too in the House of Representatives is Speaker Mike Johnson. I believe he's an honest broker. I know that there's some people that sometimes have frustrations with him. I mean, you're always going to have that, but he's going to be honest. Maybe they don't like the answer. Maybe that's why they get frustrated with it, but he's going to tell us the truth. And I appreciate that about him, because when you have the truth and you know what the problems really are, then you can honestly try to find a solution that is going to take care of the problem, rather than working with bad information. So those are the couple of things that I would say are different than when I was there before.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
You bet. Thanks for having me on.
Have a good one. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Welcome to our Q&A section, our favorite part, and we have a question from Neil, and he asks, what do you think about Jasmine Crockett launching a Senate bid?
A lot.
I have a lot of thoughts.
A lot of thoughts. We've talked about Texas so much on here.
Yeah.
I do truly think, and it could just be me being conceited and being from Texas, but I do think that the Texas Senate race in particular is going to be the center of the midterms. But I mean, then you also look at the House and you look at the redistricting effort that was just held up by the Supreme Court a few weeks ago. And I think that in a blue wave, it could maybe backfire on Republicans. They're pulling Republican areas into blue districts to make that district flip red, but then that also does dilute these super red districts. And in a really, really good year for Democrats, which 2026 could end up being, or it could just kind of balance out, could hurt Republicans. So we
won't really know the impact of these redistricting efforts until 2026 is over. Because I think Republicans are really banking on this helping them keep the House. I don't think that's going to work. So that's out.
Yeah.
And then they're banking that, and Senate races are not controlled by redistricting, obviously, because Senate races statewide. But I think it will be interesting to see what happens in these races, because if Democrats are really invigorated by this redistricting effort, you're going to see more of them come out to vote. And the more they come out to vote, that's when it impacts the Senate races. And so a Senate race like Texas is really indicative on not only what Republican you're up against, but also if your Democratic candidate is worth backing. And I think that's the question that a lot of people have about Jasmine Crockett. I have thoughts. You can go first, because you're a Texas girl, but
I think that if you listen to how Crockett wants to campaign and what she said about campaigning, well, first of all, let's start about how she announced on filing deadline last Monday. And Colin Allred, he's a previous House member. He ran for Senate against Ted Cruz in 24, lost by pretty much double digits, which was a really good year for Republicans. But if you look back to the last time Cruz ran, Beto O'Rourke came within 2.7 margin points.
Which in a red state like Texas was insane.
And I do think that this midterm year was very much trending towards a race like Beto Cruz, where it could be literally neck and neck within
it could be inches,
margin of error. So you saw Allred pull himself out of the Senate race because Crockett called both Colin Allred and State Representative James Tallarico, who James Tallarico is a pastor. He is loved by Joe Rogan, which is huge in Texas. He led Democrats on pushing back on Trump's redistricting effort, which is kind of what he got his name made after his Rogan episode.
Right.
He was really shaping out to be, in my opinion, a messenger like Beto O'Rourke, who was incredible for a Democrat in Texas. He was an incredible fundraiser, who Tallarico is. He had the best first quarter of fundraising of any Senate candidate in Texas ever. He raised millions, which is wild, especially coming from a Democrat. And it was all coming from small contributions, which is even crazier. So then you look at his campaign tactics. He's going to rural areas and smaller areas of Texas, and he's really trying to get those swing voters because he does have that Christian appeal. And if the Republican nominee is Paxton, he is completely scandal-ridden. He's going through a divorce. I don't think he necessarily appeals to very Christian voters, even if they do love Trump, because he is so scandal-ridden. He's been impeached, but he was acquitted. Lots of issues there. Tallarico has the ability to appeal to people. He is a good communicator. He is extremely Christian. He was a teacher. He just has a lot of appealing.
And he's pretty centrist, I would argue.
Even keeled, yeah.
Yeah, like he has his progressive policies that he champions, but on the most part, he is somebody who comes across to you as a very bipartisan centrist candidate. And I think that someone like that in a state like Texas is an infinite better resource and someone that will really break through the noise versus somebody like Jasmine Crockett, who really appeals to that progressive
base,
loud Democratic base, which, to her credit, a lot of times that base is what helps win elections.
Totally.
It's the people who get fired up.
People who vote primaries.
Yes.
It is, yes. And I mean, I think she could be a very appealing candidate in a very blue state, but that is not Texas.
Yeah.
And she said that she's going to focus on not swing voters, but the Democratic base and getting the Democratic base out to vote, much like Obama did. But that doesn't work if the state is red.
And also, you
Texas
cannot
is not
say
even a
that
purple
Obama
state.
and Crockett are the same.
No.
Obama and Crockett, Obama did do that. But I would argue, has the temperament and the of James Tallarico.
And Obama loves James Tallarico.
Yes. So I think that, and I'm not going to speculate whether Obama backs one or the other.
I don't think he will.
I would maybe even argue that he probably won't wade in at all.
I don't think he will.
But I think that James Tallarico, I think, was honestly, and I'm not going to say is potentially one of Democrats' best chances to flip this seat. And I think just in general, and we've talked about this, Jasmine Crockett coming into the race just makes it more complicated just in a primary sense. Because now Democratic voters so much money is now going to be dedicated towards that primary versus
the general
election, which is arguably more important. And you have two very different candidates, and you have to sit back and think, which one, and that's how it kind of goes with all primaries, and Republicans have this problem too. It's, do I want to vote for somebody who is loud and can get people riled up and can, really speak to the camera and to social media? Or do I want somebody who is actually a legislator and a policymaker and someone who's even keeled and can get things done? And what we saw in 2022 was that Republicans often voted for the more loud, abrasive, more far-right candidate over a more moderate, even-keeled policy maker in the primaries. And then that Republican went on to lose to the Democrat in the general. And I feel like right now that's unfortunately a problem that Democrats are starting to slip into as well. And this Texas race could be very indicative of that, is do you go with the member who's going to fire people out? Jasmine Crockett's probably one of the most influential members on Capitol Hill when it comes to getting people riled up and to be inspired and to be involved.
Against Trump. Honestly, I would say the biggest thing is her pushback on Trump. And I know that a large portion of the Democratic base wants that pushback on the White House, and they don't
they've been calling for it, and they don't feel like the party's doing it.
They don't feel like the party's doing it. But those candidates just don't do as well in generals. They may do amazing in a primary and bring out record numbers, but in a general, in a red state, that is going to be a really tough feat for them to beat any Republican candidate comparatively to an even-keeled candidate like James Tallarico. I just think that it's going to be incredible to watch. It's been interesting. Tallarico welcomed her into the race with open arms. I mean,
which
obviously,
sounds like about his personality. So I would be very shocked if he sent something, like,
yes,
she's awful for this race. Like, that would be like, whoa, that's so not you as a candidate. Like that would have been
it would
crazy.
ruin like his image
brand.
that he's been pushing out. But I will say, if there is a primary with winning with what's his name, Paxton and Crockett, that debate would be one of the wildest debates. And
I don't even know if I can watch
many
it.
people watch Senate debates.
No,
I
but I
think
think a lot of people would tune into that one.
Yeah, I would. I mean, that would be so interesting. Not necessarily sure if that's what I think should happen.
Yeah.
But that's for you to decide.
Yes.
We'll just have to see.
We'll have to wait.
I also think that something very notable is Republicans are enthralled that Crockett is in the race. And
Speaker Johnson quite literally at a press conference last week went he, like not with that noise, but like
But
that
he
was the
literally
vibe. Like
rubbed
that
his
was
hands.
the vibe. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is the craziest thing I've ever seen. I've never seen a Republican leader so happy about it. But they and even during the shutdown when they were talking about who the leaders of the party are,
Mamdani.
they said Mamdani, they said Crockett, they said AOC. They are targeting these like more high profile figureheads. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about Mamdani a lot about whether or not that's even a valid point to make. But Crockett, they could make several points that she is going to be very influential on where the Democratic Party goes from here. Mm-hmm. And so that's for Democrats to decide what they want the future to be. And they really do have kind of a temperament check that they have to go through. Mm-hmm. They have to decide if they want to run more candidates who, like you said, the base wants to see people fighting against Trump.
Yeah.
Or do they want somebody who is going to meet them for those kitchen table issues, who are going to be more even-tempered, who are actually going to come and get things done. Now, that's not to say that Crockett hasn't gotten things done.
Yeah.
But I think that just the two of them are just so drastically different.
Yeah.
I think that it will behoove Democrats to think ahead instead of looking just in the primary, because also you can get all this momentum and energy on TikTok or X or Instagram, but most of the people who are firing up Jasmine Crockett, you could probably argue at least half of those people don't even live in the state of Texas.
Totally.
So you have to think about, who actually in the state of Texas is going to be riled up and fired up and ready to go, and is firing up Crockett the best way to flip the state blue?
Yeah.
That's a question I think that we won't know until we start to see polling between her and Tallarico.
Totally.
And see where that's going.
And less of internal polling or polling from Republicans, like how the NRSC did to kind of pull Crockett into that race.
Yeah.
I think it's going to have to be very outside polling that really says anything. If it does say anything, I think that polling has kind of gotten a bad rap in recent years, and so it'll be really interesting to see polling on that race. I think that a lot of Crockett supporters find this, like the Republicans being enthralled by this, as them being scared of Crockett. I don't think that that's the case at all. I do not think that
I
they're
don't think
scared
Republicans
of
are scared at
Crockett.
all. Like, sorry to break it to you, but I
Yes.
think they are more excited than your Democratic colleagues that you're running.
I
feel like if
agree with
that's
that.
and I won't make an opinion about that, but I think that is something that if the opposing party is more excited for you to be running than your own party, I feel like maybe that should tell you right now where your party's thoughts are, and that's going to heavily factor into your campaigning, because you can also run and if your party doesn't want you to. Like, there's been a lot of, like, when AOC wanted to be oversight committee ranking member, there were a lot of elder people in the party who didn't want her to do that. And she was like, well, I'm still doing it. And
When Crockett wanted to be ranking member and she didn't get it either.
Like, you shouldn't, and I think that Crockett is actually a very good example of somebody who doesn't just fall in line with her leadership. She very much listens to her voters. She listens to people. And that's what a great candidate for any party should have. But I think that when your whole party, when the Republicans are very excited that you're running, I feel like that should maybe help you with your campaign strategy as a way, because you're not just going to need the fired up Democratic voters. You're going to need independents. You're going to need centrist Democrats. You may even need some Republicans who are not happy with Trump. And so that campaign strategy is going to be very different. And I feel like Tallarico has already figured that out.
Yeah.
And I think that Crockett needs to do that too.
I think Mamdani did a really good job at figuring that out and navigating that as well. So I think that it's the way that you take that and run with it. Because obviously people in Washington think very differently than emotionally charged, energized voters. And I think that those two things are completely different entities. And so how you take that and meet in the middle and run your campaign is crucial.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for watching Capital Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
And as always, make sure to like and subscribe, to follow us on Spotify and X, and to read at WashingtonExaminer.com.